I haven't known real passion in a long time. My life feels like a string of routines, safe and steady, drifting beside a husband who once meant everything to me but now feels like a stranger. Then one day, I saw him. Edward, young, confident, with a spark in his eyes that ignited something forgotten deep within me. My gaze started searching for him, my heart racing the moment he'd walk into the room. I knew it was dangerous, but isn't that what made it so thrilling? The first time I saw Edward was at the gym. I was 59 years old, and for more than 35 years, I'd been married to a man who, while decent in many ways, had long stopped being my romantic partner. My husband Charles and I had settled into a cordial, distant routine, two parallel lines existing side by side without ever truly touching. That day at the gym stands out in my memory, clear and vivid. Edward had this easy grace, a youthful energy that felt worlds away from the tiredness I carried. At just 24, he was magnetic, full of life, with an intensity in his eyes that was hard to ignore. For the first time in years, I felt drawn to someone. I'd watch Edward from across the room, feeling an odd mix of thrill and guilt. It was wrong, I knew that, but something about it felt exciting too. Determined to get his attention, I approached him casually, making a passing comment about his weightlifting form. But it wasn't just the words, it was the way I said them. The gentle touch on his arm meant to communicate a little more than mere friendliness. Edward's polite smile was met with a spark in his eyes. Was it curiosity? Maybe even interesting? In the following weeks, I became more intentional. I'd change into workout clothes that subtly showed off my figure, enough to be noticed but not overly obvious. I'd find ways to be near him, start conversations, lightly touch his arm or shoulder. I watched his reactions carefully. He'd sometimes tense up, or try to keep a calm expression, which made the whole interaction feel like a game. A game I was both excited and nervous about. Edward, though, stayed elusive. He was always polite, engaging even, but he kept a noticeable distance. He'd laugh at my jokes, respond with interest, yet never cross a line. It was like he was playing his own game of restraint, and the more he held back, the more I found myself wanting to push the boundaries. I'd catch myself daydreaming about him, imagining a moment when he'd finally let his guard down. Every gym visit became something I craved, and the brief exchanges with Edward started fueling my days. One day, after an intense workout, I decided to take a bolder approach. I had just finished, wiping off sweat, when Edward walked over. I was in a form-fitting tank top and shorts, hoping the outfit might catch his eye. I noticed him glance my way, a slight smirk playing at his lips. "Hey, Edward," I said, trying to keep my tone light despite the tension I felt. "You've been working hard. How about grabbing a smoothie after this?" He looked at me with that same unreadable expression, but there was a flicker in his eyes. "Sure, that sounds good," he replied, voice steady. At the smoothie bar, our conversation was light-hearted, the usual banter. But there was an edge to his responses, a subtle shift in his demeanor. I tested the waters, letting my hand brush against his, my fingers lingering just a moment longer than necessary. He didn't pull away, but his focus stayed on the counter, his expression carefully neutral. A few days later came the breakthrough I'd been waiting for. I invited Edward to my house for dinner under the guise of getting to know him better. Charles was away on one of his frequent business trips, so the timing felt perfect. I spent hours preparing the meal, choosing a soft, elegant dress that highlighted my figure, hoping to create an evening that would be memorable and revealing. When Edward arrived that evening, he looked both surprised and pleased. We settled down to a rich, indulgent dinner, the room full of warmth and just a hint of something more. Our conversation flowed naturally, but I caught him glancing at me often, his eyes lingering on my dress and the way it framed my figure. After dinner, we moved to the living room, where I'd set up a cozy atmosphere with soft lighting and plush seating. I poured us each a glass of wine, and as we sat on the couch, I felt the tension between us, an energy that seemed to crackle with each passing moment. As the evening wore on, I found myself slowly inching closer to Edward. Our conversation turned more personal, our words charged with an intensity that felt nearly tangible. I watched as his restraint began to waver, and when his hand brushed mine as he reached for his glass, I took it as a sign. Leaning in a little, my shoulder touched his, and I noticed his breath quicken. I let my hand rest gently on his thigh, feeling the warmth and strength beneath the fabric of his jeans. Edward's breathing grew ragged, and he looked at me with a mix of desire and hesitation. Finally, I made the decision to go further. I turned to him, my gaze locking onto his, and slowly leaned in. Our lips met, the kiss gentle at first, but quickly growing in intensity. It felt like all the pent-up longing, all the anticipation, was being released in that single moment. Edward responded with equal passion, his hands cupping my face as he deepened the kiss. When we finally pulled back, both of us breathless, I saw in his eyes the same eager satisfaction I felt. It was clear we were both caught up in the powerful desire that had been simmering between us. In the weeks that followed, our lives became a whirlwind of passion and secrecy. Each encounter was charged with a thrilling sense of risk and excitement, and we continued meeting at my house, where intimacy blossomed. Each touch, each lingering kiss, only intensified our connection, and our meetings became more frequent and daring. Even our interactions at the gym took on a new dynamic, with each glance and brief touch holding a hidden meaning, a reminder of the secret we shared. Edward embraced the thrill of our affair with youthful enthusiasm. His energy and eagerness contrasted with my more cautious approach, and this combination drove me wild. One night, after a quiet evening of dining and conversation, the mood between us became unmistakably intimate. Sitting together on the couch, our hands occasionally brushing, I could sense his anticipation. He seemed to wait for me to make the next move, and I traced my fingers along his arm, feeling his muscles tense under my touch. As the night went on, our kisses grew deeper and more passionate until, finally, we ended up in my bedroom. This physical closeness was exhilarating, each touch deepening the bond between us. But the affair wasn't without its complications. Moments of guilt and doubt would creep in, making me question what I was doing, though they were quickly drowned by the intensity of my feelings for Edward. The secrecy of our relationship only added to the tension. I was always vigilant, careful to keep Charles from suspecting anything. Some nights, I lay awake, thoughts of Edward filling my mind, the thrill and risk of what we were doing taking hold of me. Edward, too, seemed to gain confidence as our relationship evolved. He would tease me, his playful touches and comments driving me to the edge, and it was clear he enjoyed the power he held over me. This dynamic between us added another layer of excitement. Then one evening, Edward arrived at my house after a rough day at the gym, looking visibly tense. His usual composure was replaced by a kind of urgency, and we quickly fell into each other's arms, our kisses intense and unrestrained. All the tension that had been building between us found release in those passionate moments. Afterward, we lay together in the quiet, the room filled with the soft sounds of our breathing. When Edward arrived that evening, he looked at me with a mixture of satisfaction and longing. "I never knew it could feel like this," he said softly. I smiled, feeling my heart swell. "Neither did I, Edward. It's been incredible." Yet, as our affair continued, I felt more torn than ever. The excitement I felt with Edward was undeniable, but there was also the reality of my marriage, and that double life came with a heavy weight. Charles, thankfully, remained unaware. But every passionate moment with Edward left me wrestling with guilt. I knew I was deceiving my husband, and though I tried to push that out of my mind, it lingered. Edward and I started seeing each other even more often, sometimes at my house, other times in secluded places where we could escape for a while. The thrill of secrecy kept our connection charged with intensity, and Edward's youthful energy only highlighted the stagnant routine of my married life. Over time, Edward became more assertive and emotionally invested. He was no longer just my eager lover. He was someone I cared deeply for. We began talking about our dreams, our fears, and even our regrets. Edward started to question what lay ahead, not just for us but for me. He asked me what I wanted from life and from us, questions that were as exciting as they were daunting. His words made me confront the reality of my choices, and I started questioning my life, my decisions, and the path I'd taken. One evening, after a deep and emotional conversation, Edward led me out to a secluded spot in the garden. The moonlight bathed us in a soft glow, and as we stood together, I felt a new closeness, a deeper connection that blurred the lines between physical attraction and genuine affection. Edward gently traced his fingers along my face, gazing at me with a mix of admiration and concern. "Elizabeth," he said softly, "I know this has been intense for both of us, but where is this going? What do you really want?" His question hit me like a wave. Until that moment, I'd been caught up in the thrill of our affair, never fully thinking about the future. For the first time, I realized Edward wasn't just a fleeting distraction. He had become someone truly significant to me. I took a deep breath. "I don't know," I said, my voice trembling. "I never thought it would get this far. I was just looking for something to make me feel alive again, but now I have to think about what all of this means." Edward's questions stayed with me in the days that followed, echoing in my mind. I realized I had to confront the reality of my life, especially with Charles's return from his business trip. I struggled to maintain the facade of a happy wife, feeling pulled between two worlds. Then, one night, Charles came home unexpectedly early. I was on the phone with Edward, mid-conversation, when he walked in. Quickly, I ended the call, my heart racing. Charles looked at me, concerned but confused. "Everything all right?" he asked. I forced a smile. "Yes, just had a long day. I was talking to a friend." He nodded, seeming satisfied, but I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Watching him settle into his evening routine, I felt an ache of guilt. My life with Charles had been built on stability, familiarity, but there was also a lifetime of dreams and wishes I'd let go. Edward had awakened something in me, a passion I hadn't felt in years, but it came at a cost. Edward and I continued seeing each other, but the emotional weight of our affair became harder to ignore. The thrill of secrecy was dampened by the reality that we needed to confront what our future held. We were at a crossroads. Would we keep going, despite the turmoil, or face the consequences of our choices? One afternoon, we met at a secluded park, a quiet spot we often visited for its privacy. Sitting together on a bench, Edward held my hand, and I felt the seriousness of his mood matching my own. "Elizabeth," he began, voice low and full of emotion, "I've been thinking about us, about what we're doing. I care about you, and I want a future together. But we can't keep living like this, in secret. It's tearing me apart, and I know it's affecting you too." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "I know, Edward. I've been thinking about it too. I never imagined things would get so complicated, but walking away from my life with Charles is not easy. I care deeply for you, but I also can't ignore the life I've built." Edward took a deep breath, his gaze steady. "I want to be with you, Elizabeth. But we need to figure out what that looks like. Living in limbo isn't fair to either of us. The decision was agonizing. I had to confront the reality of my marriage, and I knew I needed to choose between a life of comfort with Charles or a new beginning with Edward. After many sleepless nights and heartfelt conversations with Edward, I finally made the difficult choice to end my marriage. It was a painful process, and Charles was heartbroken, but he understood that our marriage had come to an end. Edward and I began our relationship anew, building it on openness and shared dreams. Transitioning from the thrill of an affair to a committed relationship came with its challenges, but together, we faced them. What had started as a hidden passion became the beginning of a new chapter, one that brought with it both joy and uncertainty. Our relationship became a journey of self-discovery, transformation, and an exploration of what it meant to truly live. I'm living fully in the moment now, savoring a happiness I never thought I'd feel again. But there's a quiet, lingering part of me that knows this story between us has an ending. I see it in every line on my face, every year between us that separates my past from his future. Edward is young, vibrant, with so much life ahead of him, and one day, I know he'll likely want someone who can share all that with him. Someone with the energy to match his younger body, perhaps someone who can give him children. I picture him eventually meeting a woman closer to his own age. And though it aches, I can't deny it's likely. Still, I try not to dwell on that. Instead, I hold on tightly to what we have now, as fragile and fleeting as it may be. I remind myself that these moments are real, that the laughter, the touches, the passion we share aren't any less valuable just because they may be temporary. This chapter may be brief, but it's a gift, a chance to feel truly alive, and I'm going to cherish it for as long as it lasts, no matter how it ends.